When 26-year-old office worker Geraldine Palk did not make it home after a Christmas night out with colleagues, her concerned family contacted the police. But what occurred after this would propel this entire family into a life-changing event that not only saw their daughter being the victim of a terrible crime, but would eventually take the lives of her parents too. Geraldine Palk was described as friendly, lively, and an outgoing girl who would speak or help anyone who needed her. She lived life to the fullest and did not have any enemies. At the age of 26, Geraldine had worked in an office as a shipping clerk for the past 2 years. She had been born to her parents, Cynthia and Les, in her hometown of Fairwater with her brother and sister. The family had lived in the hometown of Fairwater in Cardiff for their entire lives. Geraldine had many friends and enjoyed getting dressed up and going on a night out. She had a niece and nephew who she adored and was very close and loving with her entire family. When her sister had gotten married, the bridesmaids, including Geraldine, had all been dressed in red, as this was Geraldine's favourite colour. Her sister described Geraldine as making a wonderful mother one day, as she was good with her children. On the 21st of December 1990, Geraldine had been at work all day in the office. It was the Friday before Christmas. That evening after work, Cardiff city centre was busy with partygoers, people meeting up for their Christmas parties, and Geraldine had finished work before getting ready with a colleague at the office. She was excited for the Christmas night out with friends and colleagues. Geraldine and a few others from the office started the evening in a bar called The Bank. This was around 5:50 p.m. The group drank, smoked and laughed together. She had plans to go out the following night on the Saturday, so her and her friend discussed what they had planned to wear. At 11:40 p.m. that night, after visiting a few different bars, the group ended up in Jackson's nightclub. Everyone was dancing and drinking, the music was popping, and it was a good night. At one point, Geraldine said to her colleagues, "Wait here, I'm just going to the toilet." But that was the last time any of them saw her that night, or ever again. Unbeknown to her colleagues, that at about 20 past midnight, Geraldine had joined a taxi queue opposite the nightclub. She did not say goodbye to them, and she stood in the queue, waiting in the cold with little more than a leather jacket over her outfit to keep her warm. Geraldine saw a friend, Jackie, she knew, as they waited in the queue. The pair discussed where they'd been that night. Geraldine told Jackie that she was tired, that she'd been out at work all day and out drinking all night, and she needed to go home and sleep. The couple parted ways as Jackie's taxi arrived, leaving Geraldine in the queue. And by 12:45, Geraldine had also got a taxi and was now inside it, sharing it with 3 other people. She told the taxi driver where she lived in Fairwater. The taxi was told to stop. It was around 250 yards from her home, possibly so he did not have to drive into her estate and turn around. After getting out of the taxi, she wished everybody a Merry Christmas, and after that, it is unknown whether she walked along Waterhall Road or took a shortcut across playing fields. But whatever the case, just 20 yards from her house, an altercation occurred and was witnessed by a passerby.
Stop! I was driving down Waterhall Road at about 10 past 1 and I was taking my babysitter home. As I approached Bracken Place, I thought what was a lover's tiff. He just had his hands on her shoulders and was shaking her.
A few minutes later, screams were heard by people in nearby houses, and about half an hour later, in the same area, couples saw a man running from the direction of the school playing fields. The man flagged down a taxi, which turned round a little further on and came back to pick him up. They drove off towards Cardiff city centre.
Geraldine never made it to her front door. In fact, she never returned home at all. The following morning, her family called the police to report her missing when they realised she had never made it home. It was just not like Geraldine. Her semi-naked body was then dumped in a nearby stream to be discovered that morning by a schoolboy near to a leisure centre in the Fairwater area of the city, not far from her home. Police believed that she'd been dragged onto a nearby playing field in the dark, where she'd been subjected to an SEX attack, and she'd been struck with a sharp kitchen instrument 81 times. He had even used this instrument to slash her throat. This man had even crushed her skull with a blunt instrument thought by officers to have been a brick. It was the scene that shocked even hardened detectives. Wynne Roberts was a senior investigating officer at the time and went on to become head of the CID for South Wales Police. When you go to a scene like that, you realise how terrible these incidents are, he said. To be found in a stream semi-naked, having just gone out on a night out and never returning home, those memories live with you forever, he said. After her family were informed that a body had been discovered, her brother drove down to the hospital to identify the body. It was that of Geraldine Palk. Shocked by the nature of this crime, police launched a huge manhunt. They carried out extensive door-to-door inquiries, which was when they were informed by some of the neighbours close to where Geraldine had lived that they had woken up to screams. It was reported as hearing a horrible single female scream, although when they went to their windows, they could not see anyone. Police took DNA samples from 5,000 local men. They looked into local CCTV cameras, although back then there were not as many about as there are today, and they were grainy at best. But despite their efforts, officers were still unable to identify a suspect, and the case was eventually wound down as leads ran dry. All evidence gathered during their inquiry, including semen samples, swabs, clothing, etc., were all bagged, tagged, and stored in case future advances in DNA technology may help to solve this case. It did. The breakthrough did eventually come, but it was more than 10 years later, and thanks to advances in forensic technology, a forensic expert, Dr. Jonathan Whitaker, was able to extract enough DNA from a cotton swab obtained in the original investigation from between Geraldine's legs to enter into the new DNA database, and they got a match. The match pointed to a man who was serving a sentence for a separate offence and was in Dartmoor Prison in the south of England. His name was Mark Hampson. He was a carpet fitter by trade and was from Taff's Well in South Wales. Mark Hampton's criminal history included permanently disfiguring a young man by using a sharp kitchen instrument and slashing it across this man's face, also attacking someone with a brick. And Mark Hampson, who was 35 at the time, had been sentenced to a total of 15 years in prison for various offences. But when police did some further digging, they had realised that he was actually on bail for serious GUN offences at the time of Geraldine's murder. Now, 2 years earlier, Mark Hampson had been arrested in connection with another matter. His DNA had been taken and put into this new DNA database, so there was a match. When Mark Hampson was arrested and charged with Geraldine's murder, in police interviews, he admitted that he had met Geraldine and claimed that that night they had consensual sex contact. But his account was rejected by the jury at Bristol Crown Court to say that somebody had come along just minutes later after this sex contact and murdered her had not been accepted by the jury. The evidence against him was very, very strong. Mark Hampson was sentenced to life in prison in 2001. The judge described him as a vicious and violent man who had not shown a hint of remorse. An appeal against his conviction was rejected in 2004. Mark Hampson died in prison in 2007 at Wakefield Prison. He was 40 years of age. Sadly, the parents of Geraldine Palk never lived to see the day that justice was served. Geraldine's father died within 3 years after this case, after his health went into a downward spiral, possibly due to the upset. Mrs. Palk became withdrawn from the world. She barely left the house, and 2 years later walked into the path of an oncoming car near to the crime scene, taking her life. Now Geraldine and both of her parents were no longer alive. Her brother and sister live on with their own families. They were able to push on through and move on with their lives in order to create a normality for their own children. But they were pleased that justice was eventually served.